on the question of parliament, you know, if you look into this book, you'll see that I am not simply dismissing parliament. Parliament is a framework which can also be improved in transformed, but it reached an absolutely radical transformation because in the course of the 20th century, Parliament has ended up with disaster. I remember I published in Italy, actually, in the periodical called Problemi del Socialismo, founded by Delio Basso, who was on the left wing of the Nenni party, not the Socialist Party, which has become then later totally corrupt. Craxi, who became later the leader of the Italian Socialist Party, had to end his life in Tunisia as a refugee from the law for corruption. And who was the man who corrupted him? Silvio Berlusconi, who has been elected 3 times the Prime Minister of Italy. And at the time when the Italian Communist Party was fantasizing about the great historic compromise, that was their expression, the great historic compromise, I wrote in Italy that it takes at least 2 to make a compromise. Otherwise, you will end up compromising yourself. And that's exactly what happened to the Italian Communist Party, and as I mentioned earlier, also succeeded in completely destroying itself, Gramsci's party, when you think of it. So, Parliament had an enormously corrosive influence, not just in England, all over the world. And therefore, what I wrote also in this book, what is important is to the pressure exercise applied to Parliament through the development of an extra-parliamentary movement. People mention engagement in Parliament. Of course, that's a form of engagement with Parliament. A radical pressure exercise through the development of a mass extra-parliamentary movement. But we need a framework of legislation. But a framework of legislation which will be in favor of the transformations we are envisaging and not against it, not the way in which the legislative framework works, always has been working for a very long time in the course of the 20th century. Now, the critique of Parliament didn't start with Marx. In this little book you can read, I am quoting Rousseau. Rousseau, 18th century figure, starting from the position that sovereignty belongs to the people and therefore it cannot be rightfully alienated. Rousseau argued that for the same reason it cannot be legitimately turned into any form of representational abdication. That is what you have in Parliament. Representational abdication. And I here now quote Rousseau, these are Rousseau's words, the deputies of the people, therefore, are not and cannot be its representatives. They are merely its stewards and can carry through no definitive acts. Every law the people has not ratified in person is null and void, is in fact not a law. The people of England regard itself as free, but it is grossly mistaken. It is free only during the election of members of Parliament. As soon as they are elected, slavery overtakes it, and it is nothing. The use it makes of the short moments of liberty it enjoys shows indeed that it deserves to lose them. Now that's very clear way of talking, and the whole problem, Rousseau was accused of rather foolish views. He wants a kind of fantasy way of regulating political and legislative life. And there's nothing true of it. Because at the same time, Rousseau also made the important point that although the power of legislation cannot be divorced from the people, even through parliamentary representation, the administrative or executive functions must be considered in a very different light. As he had put it, and I quote his words again, in the exercise of the legislative power, the people cannot be represented. But in that of the executive power, which is only the force that is applied to give the law effect, it both can and should be represented. So this is again very clear as a way of regulating legislative life and imposing it. But the power of legislation cannot be under no ground, under no conceivable ground, can it be divorced from the people. It belongs to the people. And for the future, that means also that the development of the extra-parliamentary opposition must be on this premise, because what is happening in Parliament, this is the terrible thing about the nature of Parliament. There are practical premises from which all legislation is produced. And the practical premise is that the capitalist system is absolute. All the rules of the capitalist system must be respected and must be glorified even. And therefore, the parties have to conform to that. And therefore, for the future, the big question in relation to Parliament is to reunify the material dimension of our life, where capital dominates. Capital can dominate both outside Parliament through the material processes and inside Parliament through its own representatives. Some people were talking about it, the ruling class politics. Of course, it has its representatives. There is a lot of talk about pluralism in the capitalist system. Pluralism, I put, there is the plurality of capitals. What is respected in Parliament is the plurality of capitals, and labor's role is supposed to be to consent to it, accept the practical premises of the system. And that is not in deep crisis, because the fundamental difference between the conjunctural crisis, which one of the conferences mentioned, and the structural crisis is that from the conjunctural crisis, the periodic conjunctural crisis, Marx used a very good expression for that by saying that this periodic conjunctural crisis discharges, here I am quoting this word, discharges itself in a thunderstorm. So a lot of capital is destroyed in this thunderstorm, and we start all over again periodically. Now, when it is the structural crisis we find ourselves in, that in order to solve the structural crisis, you must get out of the structure itself. The capital structure itself is suffocating humanity, destroying the elementary ecological conditions of our life. Don't forget that dimension. It is happening all over. In all ways, from energy, look what is happening to the great British company, BP, polluting the seas over there. You read about it because it is that American neighborhood, and therefore it has to be dealt with, and BP might very well go even bankrupt at the end of the road. But remember, BP is also the company into which our pension funds are locked, one of those companies. And therefore, you have here a vicious circle of a system where everything is locked into each other. Practical premises. That's a very important concept, from which all other political considerations inside the framework of parliament and associated forces, because the extra parliamentary pressure, what I quoted you from the Financial Times and the Economist, could it be anything clearer, more open, more cynical, more hypocritical? Because they address the government to follow the orders which they try to lay down. Now, just one more word about the question of Venezuela. Venezuela and Latin America in general, because Venezuela cannot be isolated from Latin America. I have seen 3 days ago a film which I very strongly recommend to all of you, by Oliver Stone. The title of the film is South of the Border. Tariq Ali was one of the writers of the film script for this. It's an hour and a half, and it covers the whole of Latin America and shows how the problems affect all of those countries, all the countries of Latin America. And as you mentioned also, well, I have of the same opinion. I have been for a very long time that one of the great hopes for humanity, for the survival of humanity, is what is unfolding, what is happening in Latin America. Latin America, not only in Venezuela. Venezuela is a very important part of it, in the sense in which historical events brought it out in the form that Caracazo, that you may have heard that expression, where the government troops murdered 3,500 people, out of which then the opposition had arisen, and then events followed their own logic. And the transformations taking place are quite fundamental, very important, and not something, the genie escaped in that way from the bottle. North America would like to persuade the genie to go back peacefully into that bottle. If not, well, we chop up the genie and squeeze it back into the bottle. But neither of them are going to work, because we are talking about quite fundamental historical processes expanding all over Latin America. And that's also one of the possible ways of succeeding, because the problems are very similar. You mentioned the Bolivarian revolution. I mean, next year will be 200 years of the liberation of Latin America from Spanish colonial rule. Now, that's an important date to remember. And there is a logic in this development. No matter what they try, no matter how capital tries to install itself, impose itself, there is such a thing as historical anachronism. And the capital system, not just capitalism, capital preceded capitalism by several thousands of years, okay? Remember that too. The capital system has outreached itself, because it reached a point where it is destroying humanity unless it can be stopped. And this is what is happening in different parts of the world, and in a prominent way in Latin America, all over Latin America. And let's hope it continues precisely that way.